Hi there! In today's video, we're going to be taking a different look at grief and loss. And we're going to be challenging the way that people handle others who are dealing with grief and loss. Sometimes people can say things that may be a little bit insensitive and are not really helping or comforting that person who is in grief and loss. So if you are planning on going to a memorial service and you just don't know what to say, or you just don't know the right way to help, I have a couple of tips in this video. And also, if you are someone who is dealing with grief and loss, today's author is really going to show you that grief isn't a problem that you go about trying to fix. Hi there, and welcome to the Booksters Club, where we find daily inspiration from the books you love. Today's featured book is It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine, and today's inspirational thought comes to us on page number 15. It says, "Most people approach grief as a problem to be solved. Your friends and family see you in pain, and they want to relieve your pain. Whether that aim is stated clearly or not, it's the sole reason why words of comfort usually feel anything but comforting to you in your grief. Intentionally or not, by trying to solve your grief, they aren't giving you the support you actually need." In the book, Megan Devine actually realizes that grief and loss is not a problem that you can go about fixing. She was reading a book by Wayne Dyer called Every Problem Has a Spiritual Solution, and she was reading the book trying to gain something to help her with her grief, and she just wasn't getting anywhere. And then she realized that grief isn't a problem and that it's actually a very normal part of life. It's painful, but it is a normal part of life, and it's not something that you can fix. And there is a quote by Anonymous that says, "Life asked Death, 'Why do people love me and hate you?' And Death replied, 'Because you are a beautiful lie and I am the painful truth.'" The beautiful lie is that we are going to live on this planet forever, and that everything that we build here will be ours forever. But the painful truth is that we all must experience death, and that it is a normal part of life. So if grief and loss is a normal part of life, and it's not a problem you should go about fixing, then why does it feel so bad, and how do you live with it? Elizabeth Gilbert said that deep grief sometimes is a specific location, a coordinate on a map of time. When you are standing in that forest of sorrow, you could not imagine that you could ever find your way to a better place. But if someone can assure you that they themselves have stood in that same place and now have moved on, sometimes this can bring hope. Just recognizing that others have gone through something similar, finding community in those who have gone through something similar, and gaining some tips from those who have dealt with the pain that you're dealing with can help you realize that one day you will find a little bit of peace from the pain that you're suffering from. If someone you love is dealing with grief and loss, this is truly going to be the most difficult thing that they are going to experience. And in fact, C.S. Lewis said that no one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. And if you are watching someone who is dealing with that, odds are that you are feeling incredibly compelled to do something. You just don't know what to do. And there are so many things that people try to do to try to help, and really it just angers them or annoys them or frustrates them because they're very sensitive right now. So how do you go about dealing with, interacting with, or helping someone that you love or know that is dealing with grief and pain? Recognizing that that person who is going through grief and loss is not dealing with the problem that you can fix is a great way to start. In fact, there is a very powerful TED Talk that I highly recommend that you go and watch. And of course, I'll leave all of this information in the description below, and a lot of other resources for other books, including this one that you can go and find in the description. But there's a TED Talk called "When Somebody You Love Dies, There's No Such Thing as Moving On" by Kelly Lynn. And she is a widow, and she shared all of her experiences that she had when she reached out to other people who have lost the people that they loved. And you would not believe some of the things, some of the insensitive things that people actually said to people who are in grief. In fact, Kelly Lynn herself said that at her husband's funeral and memorial service, somebody, a stranger she didn't even know, stood right next to his casket and said, "Today you grieve, tomorrow you get out there and find a new man." I know, right? Another widower that she was speaking to, and they were kind of swapping some stories, he said that a relative of his told him that for every picture of you and your wife that you take down by your bedstand, I'll give you $50. Another woman said that she would actually keep a lawn chair, a folding lawn chair, in the back of her car so that she could go and sit with her husband at his graveside and visit with him as often as she could. And one day when she went to go retrieve that lawn chair so that she could go sit with her husband, she realized that it was gone. Her friend said, "We took it. We didn't think that it was healthy, and we didn't think you should be going there anymore." Like I said, I highly recommend that you watch this video. And although those things are extreme cases, and I'm sure none of us would say something so insensitive, there are a few of the other really popular things that people say. You know, your loved one is on the other side, they're in a better place, it was God's plan, everything happens for a reason. These are all things that are essentially answers to questions that nobody was asking. What can you do then if you are seeing someone who's going through grief and loss, and because you love them so much, you want to help quell that pain that they're struggling with at the moment? Here's a couple of things that I have found that you can do that are actually really helpful. The first thing is take meals those first couple of days. The last thing that somebody who's dealing with grief and loss can even think of is actually food, cooking it for other people who are coming and going from their home, but then also just eating themselves. It's just so low on their priority list, they might not even recognize that they're hungry. So meals is a great way of providing some type of service and aid to that person and having it be, you know, beneficial and substantial. Another thing is sitting with them, being with them in their grief, not necessarily trying to fix it or add something to it that you think is going to kind of distract them from it, but actually sitting with them in their grief. Listen to their stories about that person. Encourage them to tell you more stories if that's something that they're willing to go through, or you feel that that's something that they're enjoying that process of. Sometimes that might be a little too hard at the moment to talk about stories, but allowing that person to guide you through the process of what they need as far as just being there for them is the really meat of what you can do. I have another video on empathy, and I really believe that that applies so much to the situation. Any type of avoidance or distraction or minimizing or diminishing what they're experiencing is not going to help them. In fact, some of the things that you can say, if you don't have your own stories to share about that person when you're in a conversation with them, maybe you don't know them that well, is you can say, "I can see how much you loved," and I'm just going to use the name Emma as a reference to all of these things. So you can say things like, "I can see how much you loved Emma," or you can say, "I can see how much you miss Emma and how hard it is that Emma isn't in your life." And there are some other things that you can do to just recognize what you know about that person. In fact, if you are going to a memorial service of some type and that person actually got up and spoke, you can even say something in reference to what they were saying, of course. What you said about Emma, I love that story you shared about Emma. She sounds like a really funny person, or she sounds like a really smart person, or she sounds like she's a really outgoing person. Sharing something like that about what they brought up as that person and reflecting that back to them can be really helpful to recognize that they know that that message that they wanted to get across to everyone about the person they love was received and it was heard. Another topic that I want to talk about in this video is there's another really famous book by Linda Pastan published in the 1970s called The 5 Stages of Grief. And it gets brought up so much. And I wanted to bring it up in this video to just shed a little bit of light or change the conversation about grief just a little bit, to say that just because you do not experience one of the 5 things, that you're not grieving correctly, or that if someone is experiencing grief a certain way and displaying their emotions and expressing their emotions in a certain way, and someone is not, does not necessarily mean that you are or you are not expressing grief correctly. In fact, there is no correct way of doing it. There is no formula in which you can lay out and say this is how someone should go through something like that. It is a very complex thing that we experience as human beings, and each and every human being is different, and we express our emotions differently, and we experience things on a different level. So for example, one of those stages is anger. And when my husband actually experienced his mother being killed in a car accident, he did not express anger. Even now, 13 years later, he never expressed anger in his process, in his own way of going through grief. Now, his brother, 10 minutes at that car scene, he was very angry and he was experiencing a lot of anger. And that doesn't mean that one person was right or wrong, or that they loved that person any more or any less. It just simply means they're 2 totally different people and they process things in a different way. So if for whatever reason you are dealing with grief or loss, or you see someone who's dealing with grief and loss, ascribing them to not handling it correctly or not going through it properly, or feeling that you yourself are not dealing with it properly because you haven't expressed one of these things, like acceptance, and what were some of the other ones? It was, let me just get it here real quick. It was denial, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and then of course anger was one of them. But just because you're not bargaining, just because you're not in denial, doesn't mean that you're not dealing with grief and loss. In the book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay, Megan Devine also talks about the hierarchy of pain. And I did want to share that here because it is something that gets brought up quite a bit in conversations when it comes to grief. So she mentioned, as an example, if you stub your toe, there is a little bit of pain and you hobble around for a little bit, and that pain did hurt. But you also experience pain when a freight train comes and rips your leg off. And that pain, even though it is a little bit more, it's still pain. But she mentioned it for 2 reasons. The first reason is just because someone has experienced greater pain does not diminish the pain that you're experiencing. So for example, if someone has lost a grandparent, it isn't the best thing to say, I've lost a child. And so, you know, with not so many words, I don't think anybody would ever say what I went through was way worse than you. But just bringing that up can start to kind of diminish what that person is experiencing and make them feel almost bad for feeling bad for losing someone like a grandparent. But then she also brought it up for another really interesting reason, and I think this is also important. She said the person that got their leg ripped off by a freight train now has to change their entire life. They have to give up the loss of the idea that they will ever walk normal again, that they will ever be able to go through those experiences that they had planned in their future, running that marathon, taking up ice skating one day. All those dreams are now in loss, and they have to create a new norm. So that is very different from just hobbling around for a few moments because you stubbed your toe. And she brought that up because we do have to recognize, and we do have to be sensitive to the fact that yes, there are different severities of grief, and you losing a job and feeling a loss for your job and someone losing a child is very different. We should approach that with more sensitivity, and we should recognize that that person is dealing with something very severe. So one, recognize that yes, there is a hierarchy of pain, but don't use it as a weapon. Don't weaponize it. I think the meat of this video is that grief and loss is not a problem that can be fixed, and it's not something we should be looking for solutions for. It's something that someone bears, and if that person has to bear it, we should be there to support that person who is bearing such a terrible thing, such an awful feeling of loss. And if we want to support that person, going about trying to fix it isn't really going to do that. But just being there with that person as they bear what they are bearing, then that is the way that we can show love and compassion, and that we can actually do something of service to that person who we see who is going through so much pain. If any of these things have helped you in any way, I would love to hear about that in the comments. I would also love to know your take on this conversation. Are you going through loss? Have you dealt with loss? Do you have some more cliches that you would like to maybe get out there? Not to say that, oh my gosh, can you believe this person said that? But maybe just share it so that people know, wow, I didn't realize that me saying that was so insensitive, or maybe other people shouldn't be saying X, Y, and Z. So please share those type of things in the comments and create a respectful conversation in the comments. And also, if any of these things shed some light on you yourself, if you are going through grief and loss and you feel as though, maybe you just couldn't find solutions, or you couldn't find the right antidote for what it was that you were going through, I hope that maybe just seeing this in a different light, that you're not dealing with something that can be fixed. It's just something that you're going through that can be very challenging. I hope this offered some sort of comfort. I am in no way an expert on grief and loss. This is just a topic that I felt, as difficult as a conversation may be to have, I think we need to have it as human beings. If you had a different take on this part of the book, a different part in this book, or a different book entirely that you think should be featured here on the Booksters Club, I would also love to hear about that in the comments. Thank you so much for clicking that like button if you found this video useful and helpful, and consider subscribing to this channel if you are new, because I post new videos just like this every single day. See you tomorrow, Booksters.